In this video presentation, I'm going to talk about how we can think and classify the different moves that we're learning in the Guang Ping Taiji form into various categories that are so that the movements are kind of variations or links together so you can understand how to understand these movements better than understanding them as a singular movement. Many times practitioners think of the form comprised of individual moves, one after another. But when you start to really analyze and look at the moves, you see that maybe the move is only performed one time in the form, and we call that a kind of a unique singular movement. And sometimes the actual movement, like single whip, is repeated many times in the form, and then you'll sometimes recognize that a section of the movement is repeated many times in the movement. For example, individual move would be stork cool's wings. Here, stork cool's wings. It's only done one time in the form. An example of a movement that is singular and repeated in the form many times would be single whip, and it's done many times through the form. But also, no, almost in the beginning, it's done individually. But normally, single whip and cloud hands are linked together. So as you're learning the form or you're a seasoned practitioner, you recognize that most of the time, almost all the time, the movement of cloud wave hand like clouds that starts off with single whip and then wave hand like clouds, and it ends with single whip. So this is a series of movements that's performed repetitively throughout the form. And then we come to the idea that when I'm breaking up the form into sections for you to learn, in the second section that I taught, I called that the repeat section, because that repeat section of repulsed monkey and then slow palm, stunting flying, step up, raise right hand, turn, step up, raise left hand, fly pulling back, and fan to arm is a section unto itself that's repeated twice in the form. So now you know that's comprised of various different movements. So whereas single whip and cloud hands and single whip is repeated exactly the same in different directions in the form, this, what I call the repeat section, is various movements comprised and then again repeated later on in the form. So you have that section here, and then the section after golden cock stands on one leg. So that's an example of how a number of movements linked together can be repeated in the form. And then in the video I did on 3 movements in Tai Chi that were similar, I talked about the function being similar in the movements and that being a sweep. So I talked about in slow palm slanting flying being a sweep over your knee with the opponent, and that was a uprooting version of the sweep over the knee. And then I talked about how wind blowing lotus leaf was a downward sweep of the opponent over your knee, more like coming down. And then I talked about how diagonal whip, which looks very similar to single whip, but it's different because single whip is done more in a straight line, and diagonal whip is coming horizontally across like that. So that was the horizontal version of a sweep over the knee. So now we have a category of movements which have variations of the function. And then we have one more category, which would be the same movement done with different footwork. And so right from the very beginning, when you do strike palm to Buddha, the next move here is grass bird's tail. And in this version of the grass bird's tail, you're stepping back, stepping out into the horse and performing the press. Later on, when after Fair Lady works the shuttles, you're going to be stepping up, and then you do grass bird's tail. But this time, instead of stepping back and forward, you just step up. And then at the end, after shoot tiger with bow, you step up, shoot tiger with bow, and then you step up and you do the two grass bird's tail. Both these are done with no stepping. So that's an example of a move that's done, the hands are almost done exactly the same, but the stepping is different. We talked about how single whip was an individual move, but then it becomes part of a series of single whip, and then wave hand like clouds, and then link to single whip again. And so that it was both an individual movement and also a link in a series of movements. And other moves, for example, like parry and punch, comes in many times throughout the form, but it's linked with different moves in front and back of it. So, for example, in the very beginning, we learn brush knee twist step, coming back, and then to step into parry and punch here. And then we saw on the jumping scissors kick how it came into parry and punch. And in the series that we just learned, deflect down, kick with sole, kick up of right foot, turn, and kick with sole, parry and punch came again. And also after carry tiger to mountain, we had a parry and punch come out of that. So that movement, parry and punch, is repeated throughout the form, intermixed with other movements where a single whip is repeated mainly with wave hand like clouds. So I'm just kind of pointing some of these things out to you so that as you look at your form, you have a better way of kind of looking at them rather than totally individual moves that you have to learn. A lot of times practitioners think of the Dalu, the fixed form, as a series of individual movements, and that's great because they are, but they can't see the relationship of those movements, and they think that one grasp per tail that they have to learn is different than the other grasp per tail, where the concept of that grasp per tail is uh, the same, only the footwork is changing so that you can adapt to the environment or adapt to the necessity of what you have to do. So I hope this video gives you kind of some ideas of how to look differently at your form, your Guang Ping Tai Chi form. Thank you.